Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. Great program today. Geoff Green is with me. He's the Chief Executive Officer at the Santa Barbara City College Foundation. He's also a nonprofit expert. He's a great guy. We had a great time. You're going to enjoy it. Geoff Green, The Good Life is next. Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. So glad you've joined us. You can always find us at goodlifetelevision.org, where you can see all the interviews, as well as what we call power clips, which are kind of special moments from all those interviews. There's some great people. Over the last year, we've had a lot of wonderful guests. We've learned a lot, from entrepreneurs to young people, public servants, athletes. We've had a little bit of everything, so it's been a lot of fun. We hope you'll join us at goodlifetelevision.org. And I'm so glad to have my guest here today. Geoff Green is with me. Geoff, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Geoff is the CEO at the Santa Barbara City College Foundation, which is here obviously in Santa Barbara where we are. And Geoff's had a very interesting kind of journey in business, specifically the nonprofit world, that I'm excited to unpack. But first of all, just tell me, you grew up in the San Francisco area. Tell me a little bit about your growing up and your family.
Certainly. So I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. My mom was a sixth grade teacher. Actually, a whole lot of folks in my family are teachers.
Oh, really?
To this day. My dad was a juvenile probation officer. So the joke was I got away with nothing, which was only kind of a joke. But I grew up there, went to school there through the public school system, and then came down to Santa Barbara in 1990 to go to UCSB. So that's what brought me to town. And my full intention and assumption was that this was just for college, and I'd head either back north or elsewhere, and some 30 years later, here I am.
Here you are.
So.
Well, and after college, you had a dream to go to Yosemite.
Yes.
And be a park ranger.
Yeah, that was my dream job from the time I can remember. My parents went there, my grandparents before them, I'm sure even before them. That was sort of a family camping tradition, and I have a photo, I think, of when I was 6 months old standing in front of Yosemite Falls.
Really?
So that was something I loved to do. I thought it was a way to combine all the different things I loved, and I thought, well, if I could be a park ranger, that would be perfect. And sure enough, I had the opportunity to do that at first as an intern. Actually, there was an intern program organized through the universities, and then as a full-time ranger naturalist for a few years, and I did that until 1997.
Yeah, and then you came to join the Fund for Santa Barbara, is that right?
Yep. Yeah, that's what brought me back.
And talk about that that season in your life and your career.
Yeah, well, I was, I'm a proud generalist. It's interesting that I work alongside academic specialists because I'm the opposite of that. And I, in a earlier time, it probably would have been called a Renaissance person, but these days it's just considered unfocused. So
Renaissance is better.
I like Renaissance better. But yeah, I really wanted to do, I loved the educating, public speaking, connecting with people. And I had done a lot of different things through my college time too. I gotten very involved in student politics, running for office and sitting on the student senate and associated student president and those sorts of things. I did a lot of volunteer work. I got really interested in solving homelessness and housing issues. A lot of environmental work was really interesting to me. I'd done a radio show for a while on our KCSB public radio station there. So it was just sort of a little bit of everything, and when I was trying to figure out, I ultimately decided that coming back to Santa Barbara was what I wanted to do. But the question was how, and what would I possibly do, and who would pay me to do it.
Right.
So the Fund for Santa Barbara ended up being the place, and it was largely because the link between all the things I was really passionate about were what you might broadly call sort of social justice issues. And I wanted to figure out how to solve some of those big problems.
Right.
And the Fund was a hub for that, and they really were a spot for supporting innovative grassroots, in many cases experiments in the nonprofit sector. And so that's what that was before cell phones, and I remember I had to fax my resume, and if you remember faxes, and then have a phone interview, and then drive down here, and then drive back, and but that's what brought me back.
I want to talk about the Santa Barbara City College Foundation that you lead, and kind of maybe start with kind of your vision for that foundation, and specifically the SBCC promise part of this.
Sure.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have any experience with community college personally. Well, actually, I say that that's not true. I had two things that only later occurred to me. One is that I had taught a course through adult education on homelessness and housing policy with a co-teacher who was a faculty member at UCSB, and I think that was in around the year 2000. And then I'd also taken Spanish classes, and so I had a little bit of experience. But when the one program I really knew well when I started in 2015 with the SBCC Foundation was called Transitions. And it's only because we funded it as the Fund for Santa Barbara. And this is for men and women who are incarcerated who want to come back straight into college.
Oh.
And so they do prep and enrollment while they're incarcerated so that they can come back and enroll immediately afterward.
Oh.
And so I was aware of that program. I thought it was fantastic. It was one of the earlier ones in the nation. It's not that uncommon these days, but that was one of the earlier. And so I ultimately found the link between the things I loved and this role. But it was a strange way to enter. I mean, it was sort of a back and forth with the board at the time about, was this what did they want to do, and did I want to be the guy to do it, and
Right.
could we work together in these ways? So once we got there and I got excited about this role, I had a lead time of a few months. And during that, President Obama at the time and Governor Bill Haslam, so the Democratic president, Republican governor of Tennessee, which in itself was remarkable. There's very little bipartisanship happening.
Right.
And they did a joint press conference on a thing called the Tennessee Promise. And that was the first time I ever heard the term. And it caught my ear, and I listened to what they were promoting. And it wasn't long before I started to hear more and more about that and really dive into that notion. And there's another funny side note. Tom Hanks, who I don't have to explain who Tom Hanks is. Tom Hanks, when I was growing up as a kid, he'd gone to Chabot College, which was the community college nearest where I grew up in the East Bay Area, in Hayward there.
Okay.
And basically, in my region, you had to know three things growing up. You had to know reading, writing, and Tom Hanks went to Chabot. That's what you had to know. Because this is the era where Big and all the big films come up. So he wrote a couple of pieces, actually, one in particular that got circulated widely about the value of community colleges. And so that was kind of an exciting junction for me between that reality, my memories of being a kid and knowing that he was a community college graduate, and then all of the things that were starting to happen around College Promise. So it was early in my time. I started in February 2015, and within the first few months, every conference I went to, there was some conversation about College Promise. And the basic notion is that the idea of universal public education for up to high school was actually a fairly controversial debate 100 years ago in this country. Does everybody need it? Why should people go to high school if they can run the family business, the family farm, if they can read and write? And of course, today you push that another 4 years further, and it's for many people, high school isn't enough for whatever they may want to do. And community college now is the question, I think, at hand. And I think it is the best possible tool for advancement, whether it be personally pursuing your own dreams and building your own skill set, or families being healthy and having the income they need, or socioeconomic advancement. Frankly, anything. So the idea is, can we as a society pay for every young person who wants to go to community college for 2 years?
Wow.
And that's the beginning of the idea.
And where does that go for you? I mean, how are you pursuing that vision?
Well, I ran into, as I said early on, that was something that was talked about at every conference, every conversation. And of course, I was brand new, learning my role. Not new to philanthropy or the community, but certainly new to the community college part of it. And discovered that there were 3 predecessors in our state. So in California, which has the largest community college system, largest higher ed system in the Western world, 116 campuses and colleges now, 72 districts, over 2 million students. A quarter of all community college students in the United States go to a California community college. And there were 3 in California that had started experiments with what they called the Promise. And the first was actually our neighbor Ventura College. And the second was Long Beach, and the third, which had just happened, was at Cuesta College, our other neighbor to the north. Well, just jumping over Hancock to the north. And so I started to get to know what they were doing, why they were doing it, how they were doing it, and hearing about that model, and then looking for something that would solve a bigger issue. And as I said, that was my big passion, really, is how do you structurally deal with some of the challenges we have in our community? I mean, scholarships are wonderful, but they don't solve the bigger structural problem. They help that one student. And so this was, to me, an idea of how do you solve the bigger structural problem of affordability and access to college. And so we started asking around, and what we found was that there was a pretty good consensus of what would work and how to do it right, how to do it well, but nobody to that point had done it because it was a very expensive proposition, especially for community colleges, since our philanthropic infrastructure is really nascent. I mean, if you think about the four-year institutions, the Ivy Leagues, they figured this out 200 years ago.
Right.
I mean, it's a core part of the institution. If you look at the four-year public universities, it was really the 80s and 90s where they started to build their infrastructure for fundraising and development. And for us, it feels like last Tuesday. You know, we just figured this out, and we're still figuring it out. But the value of being at Santa Barbara City College is that we have one of the largest and one of the oldest foundations in the nation, actually, for community colleges. And so the idea of raising $2 to $3 million a year for a program like this was not unthinkable. And so that's really how we started. We started to build it that way. We leaned on the research and the experiments that had been done by our colleagues before us, so that we didn't have to repeat those painful mistakes ourselves.
Right. Wow.
And that's what we launched in 2015.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
This is obviously an interesting environment. Seems like it's getting more interesting by the day here in the year 2020. But
yeah,
I would, reading your information here, I mean, you're clearly a nonprofit expert or a fundraising professional. You've been on all these councils and boards. And what is your council? I know that there seems like there's kind of a buzzword in the nonprofit world in recent years, sustainability.
Yep.
And I know you do a lot of consulting and things like that. How do you advise nonprofits toward a path that is sustainable?
That's a great question. And yes, that is one of the key issues for nonprofit organizations. I think the first thing, I mean, clarity of mission is always first. So you got to know what you're doing, why you're doing it. I'm a form follows function kind of guy, so I don't have any religion about a particular model being the best, but I do believe that you have to be clear on what you're doing, and then you build the structure that supports that thing, whatever it is. And for nonprofits, it's revenue strategy above all, because that's the thing that you have to figure out once you've got your mission clear.
Right.
How do you sustain it? How do you make it happen? And almost as a rule, the more diverse the income stream, the better. So you want to help people figure out what are all the different ways that you can earn those dollars. And the primary reason for that, and this is true in for-profit business as well, is that the most sustainable, the most resilient income stream is the one that's the most diverse. And that's because if one of them goes sideways, it doesn't sink you. So you can lose all of your grant funding, or you can lose all of your earned income, or you can lose all of your major donor base for a short time and be okay, as long as that was only just a piece of it. But for those nonprofits that are dependent on one or two grant makers, or a handful of donors, or a very specific single income source that's an earned revenue source, that's the most dangerous, because something's going to happen at some point that's going to endanger that. And once that does happen, you got to be ready with a backup plan. So that's a big part of it. The other piece is the board structures, and I'm a kind of a board junkie, if you will.
Are you?
I like boards. I actually like working with boards.
That's so wonderful.
And I sit on boards, and I help other people do that. And it's because it's one of those volunteer jobs where there's only one reason to be there, and that is that you gotta be passionate about that mission. You gotta love doing it, because that's the reward. You're in the nonprofit sector, you're not getting paid to be on a board. It is a lot of time if you want to do it well, and you have to be an evangelist for the cause, whatever it may be, out in the community. So I think that having the right board, having the right overall structure, and the income revenue structure is the key once you've got the mission clear.
That's great.
So.
And do you advise boards? Is that part of what you do?
Yeah, I do. I mean, so the fund, it was interesting for me that the fund, I kind of parlayed my love of teaching, and at least my version of it, alongside my passion for the nonprofit sector. And then at the fund, we had a technical assistance program, still very much there and thriving. And that's just a jargony term for everything but the check. So what other support can you offer? And so it was access to resources and teaching and models and all that. And so I started to do a lot of that and just kind of share what I had seen that worked, or what I'd learned, or what I knew from experience. And that kind of built and built and built. And that's ultimately what made me a I guess a consultant. I'll put that in finger
Yeah, well,
quotes.
no, I mean, if you're an expert, you're an expert.
Yeah, but I do love it, and that's where it started. So I do. I don't do as much as I once did because the work with the foundation is absolutely a full-time job.
Yeah.
But I do. I mean, there's a lot of partnerships there. You know, the lines are, in my opinion, very, very gray between what our work is and what these other partners' work might be. So we work with a lot of folks, and some of that is helping and coaching and mentoring boards.
I think that's really valuable.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a great board, and I'm so thankful if they're watching.
Yeah, I saw that. They're watching.
They might be watching. They are great. But I was, as I've worked with our board, I've realized what you just said, which is the only reason you're there is for love. You know, I mean, this is going to be. There is. I mean, there's not a lot of there's not a lot of fanfare, not a lot of benefit to this. There's no personal benefit. I mean, it is purely a service thing, and it can be a lot of work. Yeah. And these are the people that have the fiduciary responsibility for this.
That's
it's not the staff.
That's right.
You know, they have all the responsibility on their shoulders, and yet they're unpaid total volunteers.
Yeah.
So that's a tricky.
It is. Thing. It's where the buck stops, and there is a lot of debate, theoretical and wonky nonprofit circles about, does that model still work, and what is that? And the place I've always started, and usually when I'm doing a training for a new board or a younger board, it's to kind of frame it in the legal framework in which a board exists. And really, it's the tax status. So, and we can talk about business in a moment here, but I'm fond of saying that 501c3 is a tax status, not a business model. Because nonprofits are businesses in every way.
Yeah, I don't think they should be called nonprofits myself.
I know.
I think they should be called tax-exempt organizations.
Well, yeah, I mean, how many organizations define themselves by what they're not? I mean, you don't say I'm
yeah, right, exactly. And if you're a nonprofit, you're not going to be in business.
That's right. That's right. So I'm with you. Let's start that. We'll start that campaign.
Let's do it.
I need something else to do. Let's do that. Well, I think there's some really good points there, and the way that the nonprofit sector was. The trade that we make in the nonprofit sector is that by making the case that our mission is in itself of value. I mean, the idea of taxation is that you're taxed on your commerce or your income or all the things we're taxed on because we have to pay into the common good. So whatever that common good that we all want to share the cost of. And nonprofits make the case that they are the common good, that they're basically what they do is as valuable as any tax they might pay. And so they're excused from some of their taxes. Not all, and people forget that. I mean, we're tax-paying organizations. We pay payroll tax and a lot of the larger taxes. But the idea is they do that, and then in turn, the community, and in this case, the people of the state of California, because nonprofits are incorporated by state just like for-profits are, have the obligation and opportunity to basically make sure that they're making good on their mission. And that's really what the board is supposed to be. Is the representatives of the people of the state to govern and make sure that the nonprofit is doing what it says.
Right.
And so it is an unusual dynamic, especially when you have a long-time or a founding executive director. Nobody's ever going to know more about that work than that person, and yet they report to and ultimately are governed by a board of directors of volunteers.
Right.
So yeah, it's a funny dance.
It
to
is.
Be sure.
No, that's for sure. You've had an interest in homelessness.
Yes.
And I know you've been involved in the efforts here locally for a long time. Mm-hmm. Talk about kind of that interest and also the progress we've made and kind of where you see it going from here.
Yeah, so I'll be very clear. I think housing is a human right. I think we all deserve safe shelter of some kind, and it is, and for most people, fortunately, they do that through their ability to earn an income and pay for housing on the open market. But for others who can't, for any number of reasons, I think one of the things that we're called to do as a community, as a society, is figure out, okay, so then what? And I have been really interested in that because it's the most expensive piece of our living arrangement for everybody. I mean, housing usually is the biggest piece of what you pay for. Right. And so there's no easy solution because you can't just do it in a quick way. And of course, emergency shelter beds are critical, but they don't solve the bigger problem. So how do you put that system together? So someone who's on the street has a place to go on a cold night, which people can identify with generally. The soup kitchen model, the shelter bed model. But then ultimately, where do they go from there? What do you need to get there? And I think there's been a lot of really smart, good experiments, and there are thousands of people committed to this work. But it's telling that we've not solved it.
Right.
So 10 years, well, I shouldn't say 10 years ago. I think it was now 12 to 13 years ago. There was a 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness. And this was a wave of things that came out. The Bush administration had a program at a national level that had pushed this notion of a 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness. And so a lot of communities signed on to that. There was federal funding for it. And our community was one of them. And I was part of this group of, I think, 40 people that crafted this plan. And if you read the plan today, it's a smart plan. It still holds up. But the fact is we didn't do it. And the reason is we didn't commit the necessary resources. And that happens time and time again, place after place. There's a moment where people's eyes are on the issue, and then it drifts. And so I think political will and philanthropic consistency are the two biggest challenges.
So money was the problem.
I think money and political focus. I mean, it's not a sexy issue. It's a hard one to deal with, especially if you see it up close. So there's those moments where you hear about something, and then of course there's the flip side of the issue, which is where people don't want someone who's been living on the streets for a month on their front doorstep. They feel like this is an invasion of my space or my property or my privacy, or just it's an unpleasant reminder of the reality of what our community really is made up of. And so so we have to balance the notion of making sure that our public spaces are clean and safe, but with offering real shelter. Because you don't just, if you move people on, you don't solve the problem. And we've seen that time and time again. People have been shooed away from places, and in some cases legitimately so. I'm not suggesting folks should just say, oh, okay, well, there's nowhere to sleep, so you might as well sleep here. But we have to remember that the homelessness epidemic is tied with a mental health crisis.
Right.
It's tied with our wealth inequality. It's tied and income inequality, which of course we know has been growing. And it's tied with a whole range of other things that, frankly, it's really costly to do it the way we do it now. And there were some stories, it was probably 5-6 years ago, $1 Million Murray and these sort of headlines that caught everybody's eye that said that, if you actually calculate the cost of caring for someone who has no shelter, their time in and out of jail, their time in and out of rehab, their time in and out of hospitals and emergency rooms, it is a really expensive way to live. And so what they made the economic argument. So even if the moral imperative or the social imperative or anything else wasn't enough,
right,
you could make that economic argument that it's actually cheaper to just house everybody. And the sort of the housing first model was
I was just going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
The housing first model kind of became a thing.
Yeah.
I've seen that in the apartment complex we had in Dallas, where we had we had 488 units in one complex. Everything's big in Texas. 488 units. 70 of them, or somewhere around 70 of them, were a permanent supportive housing for chronically homeless. They had to be chronically homeless with a disability, which could be alcoholism, could be. But if you had those two things and you submitted to the program, which included testing, you had a caseworker, it was permanent.
Yeah.
And I thought it worked well.
That's brilliant.
It was now unfortunately there's not a lot of complexes, like where we were kind of out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
But I saw the housing part where you put a roof over somebody's head, and we'd have a bed for them and a couch, and that then it gave you a shot at answering some of the other.
Exactly.
It gave you a shot at the mental health. I mean, have you seen it? I mean, I'm sure you've seen it work.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the model, and I don't think there's any question left about is that the right way. It is the only way that's worked at a large scale, which is you can deliver services endlessly, but if someone doesn't have a stable roof and a home and a bed, you're never going to get past that first step. But if you can first house somebody and then deliver whatever supports they need on site. And it's just not that expensive compared to the cost of keeping someone homeless.
Right.
So in our community, I mean, you asked about here, I will say we have one of the best run, and I just retired. I'm kind of biased. I just retired from another volunteer job. But I spent 12 years on the commission for the Housing Authority for the city of Santa Barbara.
Okay.
In fact, my last meeting was just last week.
Oh, really?
And I have so much respect for that crew. I mean, it's led right now by Rob Fredericks and his team, and they do it right. They just do it right, and they've done it for over 50 years. So we have a great model of how it can work. We also have an incredible nonprofit group. I mean, you have Transition House for families experience homelessness. You have the Rescue Mission. You have PATH, which is formerly the Cacique Shelter, formerly Casa Esperanza. And so each of them do a piece of the puzzle. The problem again is scale, and we don't have enough beds and we don't have enough infrastructure to do it for everyone that needs it. And so that's really the question on the table. You may have seen Los Angeles a couple of years ago passed a pair of measures that actually funded homeless services at a remarkable level. But you can see today, even that the money alone doesn't solve the problem. So it's huge, it's complex, I think it's critical, and to this day, it was one of the first issues I got involved with, but I would say if I had to pick what's the most critical, that would be in the top two, top three maybe. Yeah.
You do a lot, so I was reading. It took me a while, but what drives you? I mean, I honestly, I don't know if I've read about somebody your age who's kind of done this much, and a lot of it's volunteer leadership. But what gets you up in the morning? I mean, why do you do all this?
That's a fair question. I think, and I don't mean this to sound trite, but I grew up. I never worried about all these things that I work on. I grew up. I have a wonderful family. Didn't worry about have a roof over my head, food, had great schools. I feel like, what's the saying, to those to whom much is given, much is expected.
Right.
I mean, it's that notion of paying it forward, or however you phrase that. And I enjoy it because I like, personally, what I get out of it is the experience of seeing something work. So I like the challenge of seeing a problem and trying to fix it in some manner or figure out a solution, either something that hasn't been tried before or something that's only been tried at a small scale, and can you do it bigger? And I think that's a very human thing. I think there's a lot of us get satisfaction out of doing good, fixing a problem. And I tend to be a glass half full person on virtually everything, including philanthropy. And maybe that's why I ended up accidentally doing the fundraising side of the work. And most fundraisers are accidental, in case you haven't heard us say that before. Very few 5-year-olds say, I want to be a fundraiser when I grow up. But I do think that that's a part of it, is that it becomes, once you learn that that's the tool for all of this, money is just the tool. That's what it's for. And if you can fundraise, there's a lot of people out there with plenty. And that's one of the interesting things of and really one of the tragedies of our moment, is that there are so many people with so much, at the same time that there's more and more people with so little and not enough. And so bridging that, philanthropy isn't the solution in itself. There's a lot of things that go into how do you make that more equal so that everyone has a fair shot. But it can be a starter, and philanthropy can be the venture capital, if you will, to try something out in the nonprofit side that otherwise might not have happened. And I love the sector because it's, this is probably not entirely fair to say this, but if government, you can't get the political will. So to do something through a governmental structure of any level, federal, local, you name it, you have to have the political will. If you can't build the political will, it's a non-starter. To do it in the for-profit sector, you have to have a profit model. So you have to be making money somehow. And if there's a problem that needs to be solved, but you can't figure out how to make money from it, it's a non-starter. So in between those two spaces is where the nonprofit sector lives, and it sort of draws from both. So you build political will among enough people that want to give, and institutions, and you build a model where you can generate enough revenue to get it going, and that's where the nonprofit sector lives.
And if you can do it in a sustainable way, you can make a big difference.
You can build on it. And if we think about the successful institutions in our community, most of them started as fairly radical nonprofit notions. I mean, they were this little idea that probably a whole lot of people said, I don't think that's going to work, Bob. But here we are. So so that's the satisfaction in it.
That's fantastic. Well, we're out of time already.
Yeah.
Jeff Green for president. Jeff Green for president.
That's not a job I'm seeking, but thank you.
Yeah, congratulations. Thanks for what you've done for the community, seriously.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Okay. And we'll see you next time. This is Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. What is Good Life TV, you may ask? Well, let me tell you. Good Life TV exists to inspire, empower, educate, and encourage. Those are the things we want to do in a rough year that we're having. We want to encourage you. We want to inspire you. We're telling stories. They're real life stories. They're not all celebrities. They're people from all walks of life. And I think you're really going to be encouraged. There's a bunch of them at goodlifetelevision.org. So go there today, goodlifetelevision.org. Get encouraged. We love you. God bless you. Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. Great program today. Ernesto Paredes is with me. He's the Executive Director of Easy Lift Transportation here in Santa Barbara, 2018 Man of the Year. A great guy, a humble guy. You'll learn a lot. I did. Ernesto Paredes on The Good Life, next. Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. So glad you joined us today. You can always find us at goodlifetelevision.org, where we have all these great interviews. Full form interviews are there. There's also what we call power clips, where some great moments from those interviews. I think you really like it. So goodlifetelevision.org. You can find us also on all the social media platforms, and we're just so honored that you've joined us. I'm really excited about my guest today. Ernesto Paredes is with me. Ernesto, welcome.
Dean, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great having you. I loved reading your story. Ernesto is the longtime executive director of Easy Lift Transportation here in Santa Barbara, but he's also like a lot of other things. And so, but first of all, I wanted to start with, in 2018, you were the Man of the Year here in Santa Barbara Foundation, Man of the Year.
Yes.
If I was you and I went home and I was having a disagreement with my wife, I'd probably just say, I'm Man of the Year, right?
Yeah, it's gotten me very little leeway there, but
it didn't work.
No, it didn't work. But my mom loves it, from that standpoint, it's been great. No, but
you grew up in Goleta here in the Santa Barbara area. Talk about that, kind of growing up and what it was like for you here.
Well, thank you for that. Again, my parents moved to Santa Barbara. They were from Texas.
Okay.
And they went west, and they actually had relatives that had moved to San Jose. And so on their way back from San Jose after visiting, they had to stop to get some formula for my brother. Well, not formula, but some milk for my brother on their way down. He's an older brother, 4 years older. And they stopped in this little community called Santa Barbara. And, a pretty nice place. And my dad, being a teacher, high school teacher, thought, well, let me see what they're paying the teachers here. And it turned out they were paying a lot of money. They were paying $18,000 a year, and that was great money back then. And they were actually looking for a teacher. And so 6 months later, my family traveled here. They thought there's a university here. What a great community! And so we moved to right off of Patterson, and just outside of Santa Barbara proper. But it was one of the greatest experiences growing up there, because I got to get access Santa Barbara, but for me, my other home was the Goleta Boys Club before it was Goleta Boys and Girls Club, and that's had a huge impression on me also.
Yeah, talk about that. I read about that.
Yeah, well, it was very fortunate. A lot of people locally, probably at the time, grew up with Sal Rodriguez, who was the longtime director, and he was one of my basketball coaches. And so he was one of those people that he would push us. He had confidence, that quiet confidence in us. And it was funny because I grew up in Santa Barbara, and as much as I loved it here, I thought it's a boring place. There's nothing to do here in Santa Barbara. And we'd go travel to Los Angeles for basketball tournaments. And I would always value a community by how great their billboards were, because we don't have billboards in Santa Barbara. So I thought, oh my God, this place is fantastic. I want to live here. They got a Wendy's, they got a Burger King. This is great. But no, we had those great experiences of growing up with someone that was that first non-parent mentor. That was really important. That someone that had saw something in us, myself and my teammates, that we thought, this is we could actually do this. We could beat these teams that were bigger than us, faster than us. But we were very lucky to have someone who really believed in us. So coming back, it was just one of those things that we were very lucky to grow up at the club.
Yeah, that's really neat.
Yeah.
And then you ended up, so San Marcos, City College, USC.
Yeah.
And then I thought it was interesting. You studied gerontology, right? Is that how I pronounce it?
Gerontology.
Gerontology, which is the
study of the aging process.
Of the aging process. Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, it was interesting because when I was in school, I was always an athlete in high school, and I'll be honest with you, for me, I was a very good C student. I wasn't an A or B student. If I got an A, it was probably in athletics. And I worked as much as I wanted to be academically proficient. It just didn't come really easily to me. And so when I was getting ready to graduate, I thought, okay, my grades aren't prepared to go to the school I really want to go. So City College was a great transition from high school to learning how to budget my time, how to study. So I will always be very thankful for my experience at City College. And I thought I was going to get into physical therapy. Being an athlete, former athlete, I was always fascinated by the human body. But I'd always worked at a rehab institute in Santa Barbara, which is now Cottage Rehab. And I loved working with seniors because a lot of them, my grandparents were in Texas and Mexico. So I only got to see them really in the holidays. So it was, or you'd talk to them on the phone. And that was a hard relationship to maintain. But when I got to talk to individuals on a daily basis, when working with physical therapy, as a physical therapy attendant, the stories were fascinating.
Yeah.
You know, growing up, you know, I was early dating, and I thought, I'd talk to some of these people, hey, didn't you go on a date last week? And we'd have these conversations. And he would tell me the same stories that I was going through, but they'd went through it 30, 40 years, 50 years before I did. So I started thinking, wow, these aren't just older people, these are individuals who have had unbelievable lives. And so that really attracted me to that, to the idea of getting to know seniors more and more.
Yeah.
So when I went to USC initially, it was for physical therapy, but I took an elective course in gerontology, and that changed my world because I thought this is beautiful. And with that, again, I say that the rest is history, so to speak.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, my grandfather had a real love for seniors. And when he started the Turner Foundation, it was all about seniors. And he actually built these retirement homes and with all these programs and services for seniors. And I think one of the things that I discovered growing up was probably something similar to what you just mentioned, which is there's like a gold mine. You know, so many of these folks, the wisdom, you know, that we can't overlook, you know, in our community. And you're obviously in a business where that's probably a big part of what you do.
So you really, I mean, thank you for sharing that story, because that is something that is, a lot of people never get to see that early on. And actually he created something to support that.
Right.
And so for me, over the years, when we were in school at USC, they would tell us, all right, you know, this major, it's going to grow. It's going to get bigger and bigger because the need is going to continue to grow.
Right.
And sure enough, it's obviously very true. What's going on today is yet just a small microcosm of what's going to continue to happen of people trying to age in place, trying to age in their homes. It's hard and it's difficult for a lot of people to be able to afford to live in different senior communities. Some can, some are not prepared for it.
Right.
So they try to live at home, but even then there's a lot of challenges being able to live independently at home. So it's something we would work with, and being in transportation, that's a piece of the solution, but it's not the full solution.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. Easy Lift Transportation.
Yeah.
Here where we are in Santa Barbara, California, you've been the executive director for a long time. Talked about Easy Lift from somebody who's never heard of it.
Sure.
What is the vision?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Well, it's a great, again, that's something I never thought it was as important as it is. It's access to the community. So Easy Lift Transportation started back in 1979 as a project of the local Easter Seals and the local Community Action Commission. They recognized there was a group of individuals who, if you recall, the MTD buses back in the day, you had to take 3 big steps to get up to the first floor of the bus. And obviously not anyone could readily do that. And if you're in a wheelchair, forget it.
Yeah.
And so there was this group that thought, let's figure out how to get these individuals to the exact same places that we all want to go to, access to health care or to retail stores. And so what they would do is the original was a large RV, and they had volunteers that would actually pick people up in wheelchairs by hand and take them into the RV. It was as crude as it sounds, and financially was even more difficult because transportation wasn't the sexiest of nonprofits, and so whatever they raised the month prior would be how much service they could deliver that month.
Oh wow!
So you might be a full-time driver this month, part-time driver the next month, and onward, until the funding really solidified itself in 1990 with the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. That was a huge game changer, one of the greatest, civil rights enactments in my lifetime.
Yeah.
That changed so individuals can truly access the community.
Yeah.
Now the responsibility ultimately falls on MTD, but MTD recognized there was this little organization called Easy Lift. If we kind of bring them up to snuff, we can kind of work with them, and they can provide the ADA service for our community.
Wow.
And it's actually a very unique model here in California, and there's no other model like it where it's subsidized by local government, but as a nonprofit, we're also able to fundraise and go after these individuals who really have unmet transit needs.
Yeah.
And so it accesses a lot of the individuals who are not just trying to get to, again, healthcare, medical, but all the other great qualities of life type of activities.
Yeah, and is it people with disabilities also?
Yeah.
Is that part of your?
It's a big part. It's probably about, of our 3,000 passengers every year, about 1,000 of them are individuals with more severe disabilities that for some reason they can't use the MTD bus. And usually it's their cognitive ability is a little bit challenged, so they qualify for our Dial-A-Ride. And we work with organizations like, I know you've been with like Alpha Resource Center and Hillside House, and we take their clients, take them to programs, take them to school opportunities, to work opportunities. So it's again, it's part of the solution of our community to get individuals out and about. And
solution, you just mentioned the word solution. It was fascinating to read about you, I just got to tell you. You're a really interesting guy.
My mom thinks so too. So
yeah, well, good. Well, Mom, if you're watching. But talk about being a problem solver. That's one of the things I read. One of the things you enjoy is being a problem solver. And I think that's so great and needed. A mentality of, in fact, one of my kind of mentors uses the word solutionary. He says, we need more solutionaries. The people that are not seeing just the problems, but are seeing solutions, partnerships, collaboration. And when I was reading about you, that seems to be in your DNA. How do I partner? How do we work together? How do we solve problems? But talk about that a little bit.
Thank you for that. Also, that segue, because going back to school, when I told you I wasn't the greatest academic student, but I really wanted to be part of what was going on, and I really admired the individuals that were ahead of the class. And so what I would try to do is befriend them. And I thought, if maybe you could rub off on me. And it was one of those things. Now people call it a little bit more emotional intelligence. Relationships. How do you respond? How do you work with one another? And I found that was more my strength, is connecting with people and checking my ego and learning as much as that you're willing to share, and then turning around and working with someone else and picking up. And age has nothing to do with it. You could be older or younger, and I can still pick up a lot of wisdom from individuals, because your life experience dictates where you are today.
Yeah.
And so here I use that locally with my brother and sister nonprofits of figuring out, whether you may not be transportation, you could be arts or environmental, but maybe there's something that we could do together. And if there isn't, maybe you two can work together.
Right.
And again, for me, that's what really is the quality of a community. Is the health of a community is if we all support one another, because it's no good to have Easy Lift being very successful, yet everyone else is falling from the wayside. We have no place to take them.
Right.
So we need everybody to be successful.
Right. That's great.
Yeah.
I read your favorite quote, which I think is really valuable and pertains to the world we're living in right now, which is, don't believe everything you think. I thought that's a great thought, that especially in this climate that we're in, this divisive kind of world, where we all kind of think, it seems like most people are thinking what I think is right and you're wrong, and being open to the idea that I may not be right about everything. What a transformative impact that would have if that spread.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
I wish I was the original person that said that. Honestly, I was on my way to a meeting, and it was in a bumper sticker. And I thought, it was exactly that. It was a type of meeting where I knew there was going to be some differences of opinion. And I thought, there it was, don't believe everything you think. I thought, that's brilliant, because everything we believe or think was put there. Either we've read it, third person, somebody told us about it.
Right.
Our professors told us about that. And how many times have you had somebody say, "Oh, I've heard that person you're talking about. I don't like that person because they always do this, or they always do that. And then you meet
always
them,
is the key word.
Always, exactly.
Right.
And then you meet them and thinking, no,
right.
that was a really pleasant experience.
Right.
And that was one of those first things where I thought people didn't always believe what they thought about me early on. They allowed me to let's meet, let's talk, and figure out the best way. For me, if I could ever break bread with someone, then we have a relationship after that. It's one of the greatest gifts to be able to sit down with somebody, especially someone that you think doesn't have the same ideals, but chances are there's going to be a lot of similarities. And in Santa Barbara, I'll be honest and candid, I think sometimes we don't do that enough. I think we have a very big, great, loving community, but we think what we think, and if like you were saying earlier, if you don't believe what I think, then you're wrong. I have a hard time with that, and so back to what I was saying earlier, the more we could all come together and just take a slice of each other's playbook, I tell you, we'll be a lot healthier community, and beyond our community also.
Yeah, well, and that's just humility too, when I hear that, I think, that comes from a place of humility to say, I want to learn from you, which I just think about like my kids. That would be something I want to implant in them, that don't come with answers, come with listening first, because you can learn.
That's a great point. In fact, I remember when my son's 27 now, but go back 10, 15 years ago, he was about 10 or 12. And I was a younger executive, and this was the time where I would say a little immature executive, because this is back in the day when on Sunday paper and the news press, you'd have the social scene, and you have all the pictures, and you see, whose name was at what party. And I would professionally be jealous about organizations who were like, darn it, they raise all this money. I want that money for my organization. It was short-sightedness, but that's where I was at the time. And I remember listening to my son, and he was telling me about a friend of his who just got a great award, and he was so happy for his friend. I thought, I had to sit back. I thought, I need a piece out of my son's playbook of thinking, we all need to share in one another's success, right, and not feel like, I'm professionally jealous of you.
Right.
So over those years, those little life lessons, the more I got to participate with other organizations, go to their events, learn about the mission, see the passion of individuals, it made me appreciate being able to not only be a citizen in this community, but eventually be a donor of other organizations who are doing great things.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's great. One of the ventures you've been involved in is Social Venture Partners. What is that?
Well, it's a group of individuals here locally. It's made up mostly of business individuals, a lot of retired business individuals. And the idea for them is to find a cause and to pool not only their financial resources, but a lot of them, again, are semi-retired or retired CEOs. And they have a lot, we were talking about earlier, this wisdom, this knowledge. And rather than just letting it wither away, they're sharing it with newer CEOs or newer entrepreneurs, and figuring out how we can solve either a social issue or something that is an item which right now is a perfect time for social venture partners, because as they say, necessity is the mother of all, yes. Right. And this is something kind of thing that we don't know what we need right now, but a lot of seniors, and we were talking earlier, in order to live independently, there's going to be more solutions. There has to be more solutions for them, whether it's using technology. We have the telehealth now. Right. People can, rather than having to go all the way to your doctor's appointment, you can just right there on your laptop.
Right.
Or now there's an app on Alexa that would kind of take the place of that little button where it says, "I've fallen, I can't get up." You just call out on this program, and it will immediately alert a family member saying something happened to your
Wow.
mother, your dad, and it will alert the authorities. So using technology, all these ideas, it kind of takes some money to back a lot of these ideas.
Right.
And that's what Social Venture Partners is trying to do, is find solutions to these problems that are growing in our community.
And then invest in them.
Yeah, not
Money,
only
wisdom,
the financial, but the wisdom too.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And is it for profit, or is it? Is it for profit investments?
It's a nonprofit. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
it's nonprofit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is fantastic.
Yeah, it is.
You and I have several things in common, thankfully for me.
Not our hair. You're winning. You're winning.
I thought I was going to be bald by now because my grandfather on my mom's side was a goner, like 40. And I thought you got it from your mom's dad, and then here I am.
Well, I was the opposite. I thought I was never going to go bald, so we got bad information.
We had bad information. We're both middle sons.
Yeah.
With all three boys.
Yeah.
What was it like for you? I felt like I was kind of the peacemaker, still am, trying to hold it all together. Was that your experience?
My experience was a little bit different, where my older brother is a great man, but he also was a great leader early on. So I always wanted to be my older brother.
Oh, really?
Whatever he did, I'm going to do. I mean, he ran track, I ran track. He ran, student council. I went student council. He went to City College. I went to City College. He went to USC. Same
really?
fraternity.
So you followed him.
I just really, truly followed his steps. He went to the business school at USC, and that's where we kind of splintered up. I really enjoyed working with seniors and went the gerontology route. And I thought, when I got back to Santa Barbara, in the nonprofit world, although I didn't really know what nonprofit was at the time, I was just looking for a job. And that's where my first job was at the YMCA. And I got a great first experience, because the great thing about the YMCA is not only is it a nonprofit, but they have a little bit of a corporate setting. So you knew what you need to do to accomplish to get to the next level. And their trainings are fabulous. So this is one of those things that where my brother and I, we got to still work together, because again, he was a business person, so I would always call him and ask him, what do I need to do in this situation? My younger brother, he was all financial and has done very, very well for himself. He lives down in San Clemente, California, and
really?
Loves it down there. And
nice.
My older brother's in San Diego, so I'm the only one that got to stay in Santa Barbara. So sometimes I'll tell him I think I'm the richest one of the family because I get to be in Santa
Lifestyle.
Barbara. Yeah, right.
Well, and tell us about Ernesto Paredes Sr.
The original, my original mentor, my original hero. My father passed away almost 5 years ago, and I didn't. I've always loved. My dad always was. Shared wisdom, and he would tell me what to look out for. And back in the day, there weren't a lot of Latinos in our community in Santa Barbara. There were, but not in the areas that we were trying to develop in. And so you were trying to help me to, be careful about fitting into stereotypes. And so, thus I was always, got to go student council, not the opposite. And always trying to be a rule follower to nauseam. I remember back in 3rd or 4th grade when the teacher would leave the room, all right, Ernesto, you're in charge of the, and I took a lot of pride in that, because again, like I was saying earlier, as much as I wasn't an academic student, I really wanted to be a model citizen. And I'm so thankful that I was able to persevere and stick to relationships. And again, that's for me it's a credit to my mom, my dad, and my brothers. And again, very, very close family. And
that's
again,
so great.
Very lucky to have my dad as long as I have. Now, being his namesake, I have even a little bit more responsibility to that.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And you kind of have this service first mentality, and I want to talk about that in a second, actually. But another thing we have in common is you have a love for stories. You were asked in one of these interviews, what's your most treasured possession, and you said, I don't have one. Memories, family, relationships. And you have a love of story, and I love that. I do too, which is why we're sitting here.
Yeah, right.
Because I feel like every time I'm with someone on that couch, it's like I'm unwrapping a gift.
Right.
There's a story. There's a powerful story.
Right.
But talk about that, and especially how it affects your line of work. Because I know the way you lead, it seems like after reading about you, is it's inspirational in the sense that you said, what would it be? How would you want the service to be if we were picking up your grandmother?
Yeah.
Your mother.
Yeah.
That's how we need to, which I think, because every person, it's not just somebody coming through, each one is this valuable, wonderful human being.
That's right.
And they have a story.
That's
right. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, again, early on, after my experience at the YMCA, I thought to myself, I really want to work in my chosen academic field, gerontology. And someone at the United Way said, hey, you should, Well, actually, I went to them, to United Way, and I spoke to a friend of mine named Jim Rivera, who worked there at the time. And I asked him, Jim, tell me 10 organizations that you all support in our community. And he did, and I just picked up the phone and I called 10 executive directors to say, hey, I just want to, I'd like to come meet you and just introduce myself. I know you don't have a job opening, but I just want to kind of let you know who I am, and if anything ever opens up, remember me. Well, sure enough, about 2 weeks after I met with Easy Lift, they called me and said, hey, there's an opening just happened to pop up, and we don't want to take the time to look for somebody. We know we've met you. And so I went, and I thought, transportation, again, not the sexiest thing. I'll be there a year or two and then move on to something else. But like you said, it was the stories. I'll never forget, this one individual that I got to get to know, because you talk on the phones, or I'd go out and ride alongs, and I'd kind of meet some of the individuals we were giving rides to. Very sweet, gentleman, and, just sweet and always caring and always asked me questions. He ended up passing away, probably about 2 months after I started. And I remember reading about it. This is, you'd read about it in the paper, and I thought, Mr. Such and Such just passed away. And then they gave his whole information of who he was. I thought, my goodness, this person, what a rich life.
Right.
Unbelievable. He was, had family, he had all these things going for him, and he was still to the very end as sweet as he could be with us.
That's so
and
great.
So for me, I thought this is more than just transportation.
Right. You got to actually see the story.
Yes, and this is we're making a difference, and maybe it might be in the twilight of someone's life. Right. But if we can bring a little smile,
right,
bring them something, a little happiness, that's my job, and I love doing that.
So good. Last question. We only have about 30 seconds. You were mentored by Larry Crandall.
Yeah.
And in this town, Santa Barbara, California, Larry Crandall is a legend.
Yes.
But talk about him briefly, and then the value of mentors.
There was never a nonprofit that Larry didn't like. He loved all nonprofits. He wanted to support everybody, and I will always appreciate that. But also with Larry is one of those things that he was full throttle all the time. He wanted to raise money for as much organizations. I have a picture of myself and Larry in my office, and a younger staff member came to me and said, is that your father? And I said, no, that's Larry Crandall. And he's like, who's Larry Crandall? And made me realize, as much as great as we might become while we're out and about doing what we're doing, at some point, people are going to forget. Mm-hmm. So while we're doing what we're doing, it's full throttle. Mm-hmm. Go and at some point we'll pass the baton, and there'll be the next Larry Crandall. Right. I want to believe I have a little bit of Larry Crandall in me, so I can kind of promote the idea of community and sharing with one another.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Great way to finish. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
This has been
Appreciate
fun.
it. Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Ernesto Paredes, great guy. We'll see you next time.